Hello, watch fans. This is Pat. I'm here today to talk about the Glycine Gl0185. I've had the watch for probably about 4 or 5 months. It's getting a good amount of wrist time, so I wanted to talk about it. So up to this point, I pretty much have only worn Seiko dive watches. I have the SKX 175 here and the SKX 173, which I'm not even sure if they make these anymore. With these have the 7S 26 Seiko automatic movement with the day and the date, and then also I have the SKA 413 kinetic diver, which I also have been wearing for years. So the reason that I got this watch, I was looking for something that's kind of a step up from the entry level Seiko dive watches. I wanted just a little bit higher quality, and this is a nice entry level Swiss dive watch. So I'm going to be comparing this quite a bit to the Seikos that I have. So the Gl0185 is the same as the Gl0087, except that it comes on a Oyster style bracelet instead of a rubber strap. If you go on Glycine's website right now, they don't have the steel bracelet version. They only have the silicone band with this style dial as of today, August 2019. And Glycine makes lots of variations of color. There's a couple different handset styles and dial styles. So this watch retails for about $1,500 US. On the gray market, you can find it between $500 to $600 brand new. My wrist is a 7-inch wrist, about 17.5 centimeters. On my other wrist, I'm going to wear the SKX 175. So you can kind of see the similarities there. The movement in the Combat Sub is a Gl0224, which my understanding is that is just a decorated ETA 2824. So it's a Swiss-made movement, 25 joule, 8 beats per second. So you get a pretty nice sweep on the second hand, 28,800 beats per hour, versus the Seiko divers like the 7S26 or the 4R35 is 6 beats a second. So there's definitely more of a noticeable ticking with the Seiko versus the Glycine. This is the same beat rate that you would find on a Rolex, so the sweeping is nice. That's a nice step up from the Seiko. 38-hour power reserve, which is nothing remarkable. It's about on par with the 4R36 and the 7S26. One thing that I really like about the movement in this watch is the hand winding ability. Now the new Seiko divers, which have the 4R36 movement, is a hand winding hackable movement. I can just pick it up, undo the crown, and twist this about 20 times and the watch will be fully wound and ready to go, versus the old Seiko where you have to put it on and shake your wrist and make sure that you move your arm around, otherwise it's going to stop running. The accuracy of this movement is pretty good. It's running about plus 7 to 10 seconds per day, which is not too bad. I've regulated my automatic Seikos, the 7S26 movements, to run within 5 seconds a day. So the Seikos are running a little bit better since I've had them regulated. It's running accurately enough that I don't care to mess with opening it up and potentially damaging the watch by opening it up and doing it myself. Something else that I really like about this movement is that when you are approaching midnight, the date snaps over right at midnight. See, it's kind of moving a little, and then right when you cross over midnight, it ticks over, which is pretty cool. I like that a lot. If you have any experience with the Seiko movement, you can see that it changes the day and the date over a period of like 4 hours or so, which is okay, but there are times where if you're a night owl like I am, it can cause some confusion. So the crystal on this watch is a sapphire with an anti-reflective coating on the inside. I've been wearing this watch a good amount the last probably 4 months or so. I'm not sure if you can see in the video here, but the crystal doesn't have any scratches on it. and compared that to the Hardlex crystal of the Seiko, which I've never really been that impressed by. The Hardlex just doesn't really seem to have a lot of durability. So I appreciate that this has sapphire, but it's also at a higher price point. The case is 42 millimeters across, which is pretty standard for these divers. That's the same size as the SKX divers. And it's actually a little bit smaller than the new Seiko Turtle, which I believe is 44 millimeters or 43.5 millimeters. But the thickness of the watch is only 10.6 millimeters thick, which is a decent amount thinner than the SKX or even the Submariner. It's a lot thinner than the SKA 413 Kinetic Diver, which is 14.8 millimeters thick. This is a fairly thick watch, which is why it's called the Big Freakin' Kinetic. So because the watch is so thin and it has these curved lugs, it fits underneath long sleeve shirts pretty easily versus the SKX, which sits quite a bit higher on the wrist and it makes it harder for a shirt to go over. So the Glycine definitely has that going for it. It makes it much more wearable, but it also makes it a little bit more dressy looking because it doesn't sit quite as tall on the wrist. I'm not sure how well you can see. The case, top of the case is brushed, the sides are polished, and on the back it is stamped with some Glycine stuff. The crown is also stamped with the Glycine logo. Screw down crown. One thing I'm not terribly fond of with this watch is that it doesn't have applied hour markers. The only thing that's applied on here is the Glycine logo at the top. You can see the hour markers are just very, very plain. There's nothing reflective or applied about it. It's just printed on there or painted on. On the SKA 413, which has applied hour markers, you can see that it kind of just catches the light a little bit differently. So because the watch is so thin, there's really no depth to the face of the watch. It's very, very plain. There's nothing on the inner chapter ring there compared to the SKX, which has the markings on the chapter ring and then a good amount of depth on the Kinetic Diver. Now the lume on this watch is acceptable. I don't think it's anything great. It's super luminova. So because the hour markers are just so small on this, there's just not a lot of paint on the dial to glow. So the readability at night is okay, but it's not going to be nearly as good as any of the Seikos because the hour markers are just so big, and the Seiko Lumabrite is very good, as most people know. So the bezel is aluminum and it's a little bit simpler. It has less markings than a Seiko. The bezel, when I first got this watch, was extremely tight and almost impossible to use at first. Now that I've worn this watch for a while and broken in the bezel action is very nice, and it's my favorite of all of my watches. It's got a very, very nice tight mechanism, 60 clicks. So if you do buy one of these, don't be discouraged if at first the bezel action is really, really difficult. Just keep at it and break it in, and it will be fine. In terms of the usability of the bezel, because the watch is so thin, the bezel itself is really not all that thick. You can see that the Seiko bezel is quite a bit taller, so that can make it a little bit difficult to use, especially when the bezel is really stiff or if your hands are sweaty. That's my one gripe about that. This is not the stock bracelet that came with the watch. This is the stock bracelet that came with the watch. It's a stainless steel Oyster style bracelet, which it has 22 millimeter lugs, and the stock bracelet, which I was not really a big fan of, the stock bracelet tapers from 22 at the lugs to 20 at the buckle, which is only a 2 millimeter taper, which makes the bracelet feel quite stiff and inflexible. So as your wrist expands and contracts and flexes and it moves, it just kind of makes the watch feel really rigid on your arm. So I got rid of the stock bracelet. The stock bracelet is good quality. It feels nice and feels like it's well made. But I opted for the Strapcode straight end link bracelet, which tapers from 22 down to 18 at the buckle. The 4 millimeter taper is just something that I prefer. I don't really like the square look that you get when you don't have much taper. And for example, a Rolex Submariner will have 20 millimeter lugs and taper down to 16. So I think a 4 millimeter taper is nice and pretty standard. So I've been putting a couple different straps on it, and this is a Seiko strap from, I think it's an SRP, one of the turtles. It's a soft silicone dive strap, and I think it just looks kind of funny on the Combat Sub, because the Combat Sub is so thin and kind of dressy looking, and the dive band is kind of chunky and sporty looking. I don't really think they go very well together, but the bracelet looks good. I think if you didn't have a corrugated rubber strap, it might look okay on this. If you do opt for the Glycine bracelet, it's the same as the Strapcode. The functionality is exactly the same. You have a safety clasp and double push button deployment with no micro adjustment, no easy micro adjustments. There are some micro adjustments here. So overall, if you're looking to make a step up from a cheaper diver like a Seiko, and you're looking to get into a Swiss dive watch, I think that this is a really good starting point. I'm very happy with this watch. It definitely has a place in my collection. I don't wear it all the time. It's just a little bit too dressy to wear all the time for me. The Seiko is a little bit sportier looking, but still dressy at the same time on the bracelet. I think that you could put this on any number of straps and it would work great. So it just depends on how you want to dress it up and what you want to wear it with. But as of right now, this is my go-to if I need to wear a dress watch, or if I'm going to work, I wear this one most frequently. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like it and subscribe to the channel if you're interested in following future watch videos. Thanks for watching, and good luck on your hunt for a new diving watch.